Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and today we are talking about how it looks like new Star Fox for Nintendo Switch 2 details have emerged. So for those who haven't been following the story regarding Star Fox on Switch 2, we had been theorizing for some time that there would be a Star Fox on Nintendo Switch 2. However, with more details coming about the Mario Galaxy movie, we started to see a little bit of evidence that Star Fox might actually be in the movie. And it seemed crazy at the time, however, that was confirmed. Now we have seen the movie, and Star Fox did have a role in the movie. In fact, his role was significant. It was something along the lines of what Donkey Kong was to the first Mario movie, and we know how that panned out. That led to a big push for Donkey Kong being brought back as an IP. They had the Donkey Kong expansion to Super Nintendo World, we got Donkey Kong Bonanza, and so it seems like, as we've talked about with a lot of Nintendo's cross-promotional strategies, they have a similar plan in mind for Star Fox. They're bringing back the IP, bringing him back to prominence, so they can have a game. And last week, Nate the Hate, one of the more reliable insiders there are when it comes to Nintendo, reported that he had heard that Star Fox will be kicking off the summer for Nintendo Switch 2, and would be getting an announcement this April. Now, he said some other things which we'll be circling back to about the game, but something else has come out that tells a little bit more about this game from Video Games Chronicle, and when we also consider how Star Fox was portrayed in the movie alongside some of the other Star Fox characters, it certainly gives us some ideas as to what to expect about this game. And when we factor all that in conjunction with what Nate the Hate said about this game, I think it actually gives us a pretty good picture here for what we should be expecting when the game is supposedly going to be revealed later this month. So that's what we're diving into today. But first, a brief message. Do you find yourself unable to take a good nap during the day from wherever you may be? Then perhaps you are in need of a soft, comfortable sleep mask that blocks out all light. Fortunately, Manta Sleep, the sponsor for today's video, has just that, a quality sleep mask. This sleep mask has super soft, comfy cushions that cover your eyes and block out all light. It's easy to adjust to different sizes, and it feels great to wear. And it's helped me personally fit in just a bit more rest during my days. So if you're looking to improve your sleep and energy, check out the Manta Sleep Mask using the link in the description below with my code SLEEPRESTART. So let me go ahead and play you this clip from the Video Games Chronicle podcast that came out just yesterday, if I'm not mistaken. And there's something here that is said that I think has some very, very big implications here.
And so it'll be interesting to see if, so being honest, I had heard that this was possibly a thing. And the thing that was said to me was, oh, the game's really funny. Which suggests perhaps the writing is a focus, and that's...
So it's said that this Star Fox game is going to be funny, that it's going to perhaps be witty, there's going to be more of a focus on the personality and the comedy and the banter. And when you really think about it, this actually makes a lot of sense for the Star Fox series, because we've already had a little bit of that in prior Star Fox games, but it sounds like they're pushing things to a new level here. Now, obviously, there's room for interpretation. Maybe someone would have said that about prior Star Fox games, but as it's talked about in the VGC podcast, their overall impression is that Star Fox games have kind of a little bit of a serious action-y tone here, so this seems to actually be kind of like a shift. Now, we take a look at what we've seen and heard of Star Fox from the movie, and by the way, if you don't want to see the visuals from the movie, you can still hear me out, but I will be kind of clicking through some different images talking about the way Fox McCloud is depicted in the Mario Galaxy movie. And so, in the movie, Fox is depicted as someone who is very energetic, kind of funny, definitely cool. Like, they definitely are going for the cool thing, but he's not like super serious. He's kind of like a very lighthearted person, and it's a little bit of a shift from how I've thought of Fox McCloud in the past. This person looks a lot more easygoing. Now, that's not to say that there hasn't been some hints about his easygoingness in the past, because we have seen that he does kind of like hang out with the boys, with the rest of the crew, and there are those occasional cool one-liners, so There's definitely been some personality depicted or suggested in the past, but the way we see Fox McCloud in the movie, it's definitely a lot more evident that Fox McCloud is more of a playful person, at least with his persona in the movie. But when we consider this, and how it looks like they're treating Fox McCloud in a similar fashion to Donkey Kong, in the sense that they're using these Mario movies to bring back these characters, revive the IP, and depict them a little bit differently, a little bit of a redesign, not just visually, but also personality-wise as well. So Donkey Kong and Bonanza, not exactly the same as the movie, but there is this new art style, and we do see a lot of expressiveness, a lot of funny gestures. They're definitely depicting Donkey Kong in a way that I think is going to make a lot more people fall in love with the character. And I would say this is kind of an approach Nintendo's been taking more so as of late, not just with Donkey Kong, but just across the board. Like, we look at the characters in Mario Wonder, there's a lot more expression there, or in Mario Kart World as well. I believe the idea is to focus on these expressions, make these different Nintendo characters a lot more personable, because Nintendo understands that their IP is their strongest asset, which is why they've gone into the movie business, because it really pushes those IP. We've talked about this before, but Marvel has seen incredible success with all the different Marvel movies, but a lot of these heroes most people had never heard of before, but they've become prominent blockbuster names because of this Marvel Cinematic Universe. And so perhaps Nintendo's pushing things in this way so their different IP can see a similar effect. Fox McCloud is going to become a household name thanks to the Mario Galaxy movie and perhaps an eventual Star Fox movie, who's being played by Glenn Powell, who is from Top Gun. It's very fitting. And so I see the vision here. And so when I hear about how the game is going to be very funny, I think that's very exciting. It seems like there's going to be more of a focus on depicting these characters, showing their expressions, more dialogue, better writing perhaps, maybe even an interesting story. Fingers crossed. I know with Nintendo, sometimes it's hit or miss. And when it comes to Star Fox, while I do think there's actually been some interesting stories told, oftentimes they retell the same tale, minus a few exceptions. So fingers crossed they do not make the same mistake again and reboot Star Fox by telling the same story for like the 4th or 5th time. Please, please Nintendo, I really hope you're not doing that. Now, if you've gotten this far into the video and you find yourself enjoying my videos, I would very much appreciate you subscribing if you haven't already. But let's now consider what Nate the Hate has also said about this game with what VGC has said. So listen to this.
Anything you know about this game?
So I've been told it is a classic style Star Fox game.
Ooh, I like.
I've been told the visuals are supposed to be very good, very, very satisfying. And I've heard it does have online multiplayer.
Ooh, nice.
And so Nate the Hate is saying to expect classic gameplay, very good, very satisfying visuals, and online play. So when he says classic gameplay, what my mind jumps to is basically how Star Fox 64 was. That's where the series saw its greatest success. That's kind of been the blueprint, although it seems like they've struggled to really hit their stride since. I'd love for there to be more than just what we saw in Star Fox 64, but this idea of having a campaign that can actually be beaten in a handful of hours, but has divergent paths, so you can play about the experience in different ways, see different levels, different boss fights, different story angles. So you're going to be going back to it repeatedly, aiming for a higher score, better time, and a different perspective of the story with different areas and such. I believe that is what's being suggested here by hearing it's going to be classic style Star Fox. Now, could there be something else here that makes it a little bit different than typical classic Star Fox? Like, could there be a little bit more? Like, we look at the Fire Emblem games, they've more recently liked adding like a hub area. And it's not just missions that you go to. There are the missions, but you have a hub area in between. I think it would be really cool to have some exploration of the Great Fox, a little bit more time to interact with the characters, have some different dialogues, perhaps depending on what direction you take in your route throughout the campaign, you can even recruit other characters to the party, and perhaps that could even have implications for the online multiplayer. Now, Star Fox 64 did have local multiplayer, if I'm not mistaken, and we've been calling for online multiplayer in Star Fox for a very long time, And I really do think one of the big failings of Star Fox Zero was not having online multiplayer. Bringing that in this time around could be huge. Now, I think about Star Fox Assault. I actually feel like Star Fox Assault, you could argue, is kind of like a classic Star Fox. I really loved Star Fox Assault. It did get a lot of flack back in the day on the GameCube because the on-foot segments took away more time from the Arm-Wing segments, and there was a little bit of jank. It wasn't executed extremely well. As a kid back in the day, I thought it was super cool. And I also thought the multiplayer was super cool, and I was always trying to get my friends to play with me, but with the lack of Star Fox popularity, the lack of popularity on the GameCube, the lack of online play, I never really got an opportunity to take full advantage of that local multiplayer that was really cool, where you can jump in and out of Arm-Wings and Landmasters, have these big maps with all these different power-ups and weapons. There was something really cool there. So I would love to see that on a grander scale with this new Star Fox. Now, as we brought up earlier, this is being said to be like following a classic style of Star Fox gameplay, which may imply there will be no on-foot exploration. But let me just throw out an idea here. We don't necessarily have to have a lot of on-foot exploration. Maybe I'm right about there being like a hub area with the Great Fox. But imagine you're doing a multiplayer battle, 8v8. And so when you die, you have to respawn, right? But there's a battle going on some kind of battlefield, and maybe you can make different choices about which vehicle you choose afterwards. So maybe you went in with the R-Wing, and you lose, but you realize in the moment maybe it's best to not help out in the air, but perhaps attack a base on the surface, and so you enter in as a Landmaster. Or maybe you can choose to attack via waterfront with a submarine. That'd be really cool if you could kind of choose a different vehicle between spawns to take a different approach to impact the battlefield in a different way. If they did something like this for Star Fox, I think we could see kind of like a Splatoon-like effect here, where it becomes a bigger deal from a multiplayer perspective. So there's a lot of potential here. Obviously, I'm speculating, theorizing on ideas here, but still, simply the idea that they're going to be bringing in an online multiplayer, there's a lot of exciting potential there that we have not gotten to really enjoy with Star Fox before. And then the other element that's been discussed is that the visuals are going to be very satisfying. Now, something I find interesting is that when we hear about this game being more of a classic Star Fox, this makes me think that maybe Ubisoft is not behind this project. Ubisoft did make Starlink Battle for Atlas that had the Star Fox content on the Switch, and I thought that was a really interesting depiction of how a Star Fox open world style game could be. It would need a little bit more focus, but the mechanics were clearly there. And then we also have the more recent Star Wars Outlaws, and I see even more interesting potential there, especially from a visual technology perspective. But these kinds of games don't seem to be the kind of game we're going to be getting with this new Star Fox. Maybe this game is being made by Nintendo Singapore, which used to be Bandai Namco and has a history with the Ace Combat games, where there's a lot of potential there. But not focusing on having open world environments, even when we've seen games from Ubisoft that could feel very Star Fox and our open world look pretty impressive, but they're focusing on a smaller scale. Perhaps finally we're going to see a Nintendo game that is using DLSS. I believe Legends EA used DLSS, but that's a Pokemon game and they're usually pretty far behind. But seeing a Nintendo-made game using DLSS finally, we haven't seen that yet. This could be the first proper showcase from Nintendo of what the Switch 2 can actually pull off. And so if this game is going to look fantastic, if it's going to have that classic style Star Fox gameplay, but with more of a focus on the witty banter, more expressions, more personality, perhaps a well-written original story that also has a well-thought-out online multiplayer, we could be looking at the most hype, most exciting, best Star Fox game to date, and Star Fox may really break through here, especially following the immediate popularity boost of the Mario Galaxy movie, where Fox McCloud has been thought to be a fan favorite. But what do you all think? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget, you can use my code SLEEPRESTART when checking the link in the description below for the Manta Sleep Mask. This is AndresRestart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I will see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.